that's kind of how it was just a minute ago, Ryan, right? We were kind of falling asleep on a pretty boring day 2 of the tampering period. But being after dark strikes again. The Buffalo Bills make a big addition on their defensive line that we're going to have to get into with an emergency podcast right here on Shout a Buffalo Bills football podcast. What's up, Ryan? Were you sleeping? Where were you? What were you doing?
What was not sleeping? I step out of the shower and I see a text message from you saying emergency pod ? And I'm like, what did I miss? Was putting in some work on the elliptical upstairs and took a shower. And here we are now talking about a big deal by the Bills.
So as the Bills add Palmer, Hoyt yesterday, I still think people were spending a lot of time talking about what is going to be the big piece on the defensive line. What are they going to do? Are they going to pull off a trade? Are they going to sign one of the remaining edge rushers? And really yesterday, it appeared that Joey Bosa was on his way to San Francisco, either San Francisco or even Miami, who was a little bit of a player. Matt Barrows, who we had on the podcast earlier this season, San Francisco 49ers beat reporter, he tweeted out the number Bosa signs with the Bills for $12.6 million on a 1-year deal reported from Diana Rossini. He said that's not far off from what Mike Silver was reporting last night when things were heating up between the 49ers and Bosa, which would have put Joey and Nick on opposite ends playing together. Probably will be even closer when the details emerge. Safe to say the Bills made the best offer. So they went out there, paid a little bit more to get what was probably the best edge rusher left. Mike Clay put out his one earlier, his list of players earlier before free agency. He had Bosa as the number 4 edge rusher available behind Khalil Mack and a couple other players. So your first reaction, because this is a complicated discussion because Joey Bosa has not played a lot of football the last couple of years, and that's the big risk. The number, to me, I think it's worth the risk. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to call it a love-hate signing. I love it that it's a 1-year deal. It's a swing by Brandon Beane in this Bills front office with no downside like the Von Miller deal, the 6-year, $120 million, where you're kind of stuck in that deal for a few years. This is one and done. And if it works out great, maybe you can revisit it. I don't love it so much because of the production the last few years. He's kind of tapered off. He's been injured a lot of nagging injuries, hasn't been able to stay on the field. So the price is right. The year's right. It's a big need for the Bills. I do like the combination of him and Greg Rousseau. Matt, for me, it comes down to how are the Bills going to use Bosa? Now, you mentioned it yesterday. They signed Hoyt. If you're going to play Hoyt on rundowns, and then you're bringing in Joey Bosa, making him a certain number snap type of player per game, I don't hate this. Let him get after the quarterback. Let him do what he does best. But if you're going to have him out there for a heavy workload week in and week out, I think those nagging injuries are going to catch up to him pretty quickly.
I like the 1-year deal, and I think I want to read an excerpt from a column that Bill Barnwell wrote. I just retweeted it, so if you want to read the entire story, I highly recommend going and checking that out. Barnwell does a really good job. He did kind of a free agency primer, and he talked about like the potential cap casualties, the tier of players that are maybe, past their prime or past their elite years, but still have something left to offer. And I want to read this. The most interesting name from the group appears to be on his way out with the Chargers. Joey Bosa still flashes frequently enough as a disruptor in the backfield to qualify as a Pro Bowl caliber talent, but seeing him on the field has been an issue. He's missed 23 games of the last 3 seasons, and that doesn't include 3 games he left early or 10 more that he was limited to fewer than 50% of the snaps on defense. That leaves 17 games over the past 3 years when the Chargers had something close to a full-time version of Bosa. Had 9 sacks and 17 knockdowns in those games, which is about where Josh Sweat, who just signed for big money with the Cardinals, has been on a game-to-game basis. There's more variance with Bosa than any other player in this tier. He's capable of a 16-sack season, or he could play 3 games and never look right. Here's the big part for me, and this is another line from his column. Most of them probably aren't in a position to play 90% of the defensive snaps as they did at their peak. Perfect. Because Sean McDermott does not want to play any of his edge rushers at that clip. I could see Bosa fitting into a little bit higher of a snap count than Von Miller, keep him fresh, they're reshaping their entire athletic training department this offseason with, I think, an idea to improve things inside the building to help keep guys healthy. At this number, at what you're asking to be, and then you hope that you're still adding an edge in the draft. I like this move more and more. And I talked about this with an insider a couple of weeks ago. Shout out to Jake, who sent a bunch of questions on Joey Bosa, and we had a conversation back and forth. If you are an insider, I sent that all out to you in the last couple of minutes.
Absolutely. And real quick, Pablo here in the comments, bothers me the Bills don't want to give Cincinnati the first round pick for Trey Hendrickson. One, they shouldn't be giving a first round pick for a soon to be 30-year-old edge rusher, especially one that's going to want $30+ million per year. You got to look at the Bills cap situation. And that's one reason I did like the Joey Bosa signing here. It's a little over $12 million. You look at some of the funny money that's out there right now, and I get it. Guys like Myles Garrett, Max Crosby are in a league of their own. They earn that large payday. That number is going to keep, going up. You're going to have edge rushers that want near that amount. To get someone in here that can still get after the quarterback in a situational role for $12.6 million, I like that deal for Buffalo. There's no long-term implications for it. I think he's really good, too, for a young pass rush room. I mean, Greg Rousseau signs a 4-year, $80 million extension, but he is still a young player in his mid-20s that can learn a lot from Bosa. Javon Solomon can learn a lot from Bosa. Even Hoyt, who's been around in this league and is more of a movable chess piece, was a 311, slimmed down to 267. He can learn a lot from Bosa here in Buffalo as well. So there's a lot of reasons to like this. I think there's more good than bad. And once again, it's the Bills taking that swing on, let's see if we can get someone in here that can make big plays in big moments, because they've been missing that, especially come playoff time.
Wolfgang with a super chat here. Thank you for that. I'd rather Bean go down swinging than not swing at all. And listen, I think that this is and thank you, Wolfgang. I think this is the kind of move that you make to add a low risk 1-year contract player with super upside, where you're going to allow him to play at a pace that he's never really played at before. I mean, when Von Miller first got in here, I remember that first press conference. We were talking to him about, before the injury, about how many snaps he wanted to play. He had spent his career playing 80% or more of the snaps, and how would he feel about playing less? And even at that time, it felt like it was something that he wasn't too keen on. He likes being out there. He likes getting into a rhythm. But for Bosa, to me, you save the 60, 70, 80% snap count games for December and January. You keep him as healthy as possible. You rely on your young players. You give guys like Javon Solomon a chance to rush the passer, get a little bit better incrementally over the course of the season, and put Joey Bosa out there in big time moments, and really just be wise in how you deploy him. And I also think it's interesting that the Bills go after him after bringing in Ryan Nielsen, who's somebody that's going to, hopefully from a Bills perspective, reshape this defensive line a little bit. He obviously had a voice in the conversation in the room in the Bills' pursuit of Joey Bosa. We're learning right now, according to The Athletic, the Dolphins and the 49ers both offered a contract in the range of $8 million to Joey Bosa. So the Bills went well above that number to secure his services. Everybody in the building probably had to be all in on this signing. And at 31 years old, whatever prime years left or prime time he has left, you're probably going to get it in this season if they can keep him healthy.
And I saw a comment in here from Ralph Wilson. It's taking a swing with a broken bat. You can still get a single or a double with a broken bat here and there, Maybe it's not swinging for the fences, but it can still work out for you in that moment. I think it's a good deal for Bosa as well in terms of the money perspective, but you have him as a situational pass rusher. That increases his odds of staying healthy over the course of a 17-game season. If he can stay healthy and produce those sack numbers, that allows him to go into free agency next year and try to cash in on maybe a 3-year deal with another team, one last go of it, so to speak, maybe where he can get good money. So, he probably knows that the Bills are in a good situation winning-wise. It's a good chance for him to get on national TV again, show what he can do. For both parties, it makes a lot of sense.
Shout out to Deco with a couple super chats here. Do you think he'll be more productive than Floyd? I do. Leonard Floyd, released by the San Francisco 49ers at $10 million, which is what a 1-year deal for him was the payment. I wasn't in on that for Floyd. We've seen that experiment already. I probably would have been more interested in it at about $6 million at his age. He's a little bit older than Bosa. Also, that experiment in Buffalo, the one season that he was here, I felt like his production fell off a cliff in the back end of the season. And I don't think you want to get in the habit of bringing guys back into the mix that have showcased that in the past. I think that there's a couple of defensive tackle moves that we'll probably see them make over the course of the next couple of weeks. I think Jordan Phillips is a fun one to kind of throw back into the mix. And then that doesn't preclude them from going heavy in the draft at that position and getting multiple guys at defensive tackle. I'm going to be banging that drum, Ryan, until we get to May 2nd or whatever the last day of the draft is, about 2 defensive tackles in the draft. I don't care when it happens. The Bills now have 10 overall draft picks. They get 2 fifth-round compensatory picks. We learned that earlier today. So I still think defensive line is the top priority going into this draft, even with the additions of Hoyt and Bosa.
100%. And then quickly on the Floyd question, you've seen him tail off at the end of seasons. He still was productive in San Francisco. He was productive in Buffalo, but you kind of know what you're going to get in Floyd. There is still a little bit of uncertainty in terms of maybe Bosa being able to turn the clock back here a little bit. It's going to be interesting, but another reason I do like this move, I wasn't sitting here saying the Bills have to go edge rusher in round 1, especially in a draft where I don't know what would be available to them in or at pick 30. But this definitely frees up their options. I still think obviously a big 1 tech makes a ton of sense. And that's probably how my first few mock drafts will go at this point in time. But they could go cornerback. That's obviously one position they have not really addressed yet, and they need someone opposite Christian Benford. It frees up the possibilities. A wide receiver. There's a little bit more now in terms of what the Bills could do, where maybe you felt like they need to attack the defensive line one way or the other with that first-round pick.
If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. Text a friend. Let them know to get in on the Shout podcast right now, live. Almost over 4,000 people watching live across all platforms. We really appreciate you. We got a super chat here from Mr. J Blonde 2012. Do the Bills pick up a defensive tackle with the first-round pick? Maybe even move up to get Kenneth Grant. I'm all on that, Ryan.
Yeah,
right?
sign me up in a heartbeat for Kenneth Grant. Huge.
You got a bunch of fifth-rounders now. Like, you can be really aggressive with the draft capital that you have to get up high enough. And we'll see what happens in terms of Kenneth Grant's pro day. Like, we'll have a podcast that night to talk about, what that could have potentially done for his draft stock, and we'll bring in a draft expert. We'll lay that out. But I agree, like, Kenneth Grant, if you think that's the game changer, the difference maker in this draft at the specific position of need, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility the Bills trying to get up as high as even like 10 to try to get him, if you think that's where you got to get him.
If he puts on a show at his pro day, maybe there. I think maybe in like low 20s, late teens is probably that sweet spot for him if he puts on his show. But either way, you're right. They can trade up for him in the first round. I mean, with 2 twos, you could move up high in the second round and get the top cornerback on your board that's available in the second round of the draft. So there's a lot of possibilities, because with 10 picks, you can't envision 10 rookies making this 53-man roster. So it allows them to kind of play around, move up and down the draft board, especially moving up possibly early. In the comments, Mike Lee, we can't comment or we can't chat with X users in the live chat. So I'll answer your question here. Big Starman guy in the Pro Wrestling NES game, the shirt that I'm wearing today. So yeah, Starman was my guy.
David's asking if I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling great. I've been waiting for some news all day long. I've been kind of waiting. My daughter stayed home sick, so I had to take her to the doctor for a little while. She got flu, so that stinks, but she's not doing, she's hanging in there. So I've been kind of like at home waiting for big news. So I'm kind of like juiced up right now. Like, this is a big time addition, something that I think makes a lot of sense. And it's more interesting the more you think about it. And again, for the Bills to really key in on this as a big time spending maneuver on the defensive line, I think it's interesting. I mean, moving off of Von Miller, they could have gone back to that well, right? Like, I'm sure they could have told Von Miller, let's shake hands in the parking lot. We're going to cut you to get this $8 million. We'll bring you back on an incentive-laden deal. It can work for both sides. But I think that they've seen that movie and they want to see if maybe keeping Bosa at a smaller snap count over the course of the season, if there's not more upside there, he'll turn 30 before the start of the season. He turns 30 on July 11th. He's of course 29 right now. So you're still getting him despite all the injuries. And I know that's definitely a factor, but I think you're still getting a guy that has 11 or 10 plus sack seasons on his resume, and something that, he's got a lot of, experience in this league as a pass rusher. I'll be interested to see it. He played 50% of the snaps this season, 51% the year before, and then 54% in 2022. I think that's about what you're looking at, maybe even lower, especially in the early months as he kind of gets ramped up.
Yeah, you said you were pretty juiced up here. The Bills Mafia is pretty juiced up here. Over 4,500 fans watching live here. We have a super chat, a big time super chat from our buddy Chris Williams. Players come and go. Trust the process. Just win a Lombardi Trophy. Go Bills, Bills for life. It's definitely a move that I think captures a lot of attention. We don't know how this is going to play out, though. We've talked about this. When you make these deals, you can envision what it's going to look like. But the fact that it's a one-year deal, I'm going to keep beating that drum. It makes a lot of sense for Buffalo to be in on him at that price, at that term, because you can part ways, clean your hands of it next year. There's nothing where you're trapped in a long-term deal with a player that has shown some signs of slowing down due to nagging injuries.
I mentioned that I sent out a text, and I'm going to read that text. Back on February 24th, I was having a conversation with one of our insiders, Jake, who asked about Bosa as an option. And to be honest with you, at first thought, like before I even really did some of the due diligence on it, I wasn't really in on the move. And by the time I had finished some of the research and having the conversation with him, I kind of flipped a little bit and got a little bit more warm to the idea. I thought there were better options, no doubt about it. Let me read it off and I'll have you react. The issue for me is what it'll likely cost, considering he's only played 18 games total in the last 3 seasons. Availability, the huge concern. He'll turn 30 before the start of the season. The production left a lot to be desired. I'm not sure he can be considered an elite pass rusher at this stage. Among all defensive linemen, including tackles, with at least 300 pass rush snaps last season, Bosa ranked 67th out of 126 qualifying with 28 pressures. So for me, it comes down to cost. Does he want a 1-year prove it kind of deal to chase a title at about 8 to 10 million with incentives, which is really kind of where they landed, right?
Yeah.
Like 12 million. We'll see if that full number is guaranteed. I'd be more interested in that scenario, but still think there's better options. I think the Browns will trade Garrett, or at Vegas will trade Crosby. Wrong. So I got to tell myself there. I could be wrong, but those are the scenarios I'd chase if I were Bean. Maybe adding Bosa as a situational guy in a heavy incentives contract in addition could be the play too. So something I liked. I think the number that you land on, it's very low risk, and I don't think it changes, to re-emphasize that point, any type of urgency for Brandon Bean and his staff to address the defensive line even more.
Right. Well, and your comment to the insider there was pretty much spot on, minus the Crosby, Max, Myles Garrett comment, which I think a lot of people thought at one point in time one or both could get moved. You take into account everything that you've seen the last few years, the sack totals dropping down, the play time dropping down. This is a low risk, high reward signing. So for Brandon Bean to make that move, I don't hate it. From his perspective, I saw someone in here saying yesterday, Ryan said he wasn't in on Bosa. If I was GM, I probably would not have been in on Bosa, but the money and the terms do make sense.
Speaking of the money and the terms, you can get in on the insider text line. We've been talking about it all episode long. It's where you could chat with me and Ryan anytime, and you get a 2-week free trial right now in the heart of free agency by texting 716-528-6727. I think that's the number. Did I say it right? 716 528 6727. If that number doesn't work, I think it does work. I think that's the one. But you could also go to joinsubtext.com/shout Buffalo Bills. Become an insider. You'll get all of our analysis that we sent out to the group, and then send your questions along, where Ryan and I are typing back to people all the time, like my conversation with Jake, that gets you kind of ready for all the big parts of the season. We'll be doing it even more as we move towards the draft. And I'll be heading down to the owners meetings in a couple of weeks. No better time to get in on the chat than right now. So let's talk about the defensive line, the depth chart right now, because I think that that's an interesting conversation to have. You have Bosa, who right now probably doesn't slot in as a starter. I saw one comment after the initial news broke that he plays mostly left defensive end. So they're going to have to figure that out with Greg Rousseau, who I think we've learned plays a lot of left defensive end as well. Bosa is very experienced. He could probably rush off the right side as well. But you're looking at probably Epinesa and Rousseau at the edge, Oliver and Daquan Jones. Then you got Hoyt, the free agent addition from the Rams, as a depth option. Bosa as a depth option as well. And then rookie last year, Dwayne Carter, entering his second season. And we already mentioned Solomon. Where do you feel like, if you're talking about free agency right now, I mentioned Jordan Phillips as maybe a second wave, third wave, very cheap option. Fan favorite. I thought he played his best game of the season in the AFC title game. And if you're going to show that kind of juice on the big platform, I think, a veteran minimum kind of deal for him makes sense. I'm not a big fan of Austin Johnson or Quentin Jefferson being brought back. I don't think either of them was impactful enough. Take out Austin Johnson's 2 interceptions. But what do you like in terms of free agency that's left to maybe make a run at a defensive tackle?
Yeah, I look more so at the 3 tech depth that's out there. There's some 1 tech guys, none of them that necessarily get me excited or thrilled about the possibility of adding them. I've already mentioned Calais Campbell a few times in terms of the production despite his age, the leadership. Greg Rousseau calling him a mentor. It can be a mentor for Dwayne Carter and players like that. So it's not the greatest free agent class. I think people were saying about the class overall. There are still guys out there, though, at the 1 tech that I think the Bills can look at, bring in to compete for a roster spot this summer. But I really do think they need to attack that in the draft, where I think you can get some pretty good 1 techs in the day 1 and day 2 of this draft class.
I'll throw another name, blast from the past. I don't have any of his advanced analytics numbers at hand, but Kyle Pico is a guy that obviously the Bills had years ago. He's had a couple of cups of coffee around the league. The latest, I believe, was in Denver. So that's a name to kind of keep in the back of your mind if, a Darrington Evans type of signing to just throw into the mix. Somebody like an Elianku was the Elianku before Elianku, somebody that they really liked in this defensive scheme. And he's played a lot more ball over the last couple of years. So that's a name to watch. But I'm with you. Right now, if you're looking in free agency, there's not a guy that really jumps off. And I think the 2-pronged approach has to be the draft for sure, but then maybe some cap casualties as we get into the summer training camp, right at the end of preseason, when some maybe bigger names might be available. Corey Gaser on YouTube bringing up Dalvin Tomlinson. That could be a really interesting one. Yeah. The only thing with him, he's going to be reportedly released by the Browns. The issue there is money. I think that he's probably going to get a decent sized contract. It reminds me kind of of Grady Jarrett, who hits the free agent market and then goes and signs for a big number.
It very well could be, because again, how many, solid 1 techs, 3 are out there and available, being released. He could be in play for the Bills. I'm not overly excited about like Tomlinson's in that bucket for me, where if they bring him in, I'm good with it. I'm not, jumping off the couch or anything like that. If I'm a Bills fan, I still think there's some juice to his game, but 31 years old, had an okay season last year, some ups and downs. It's just this specific free agent class. I didn't know necessarily if they could address that need on the interior that they needed to with a premier player, especially some of the funny money that was thrown around on day 1. I do think that they can get some good depth there, though. And then, like I said, round 1, round 2 of this draft, bring in a 1 tech that you can develop, bring along, and have on that rookie deal for the next 4 or 5 years if you grab them, obviously, in round 1.
If you're watching on YouTube right now, we're almost at 6,000 across all platforms, Ryan, on this Tuesday night of day 2 of the tampering window. Hit that like button, subscribe as well. If you're watching on X, make sure you hit that retweet button. We really appreciate that. Get as many people in here before we go. We'll go another 5 or 10 minutes here. I wanted to touch real quick on the running back movement today for the Bills. A lot of action in that room. They do end up bringing back Ty Johnson. And I know earlier in the day when they came to an agreement with true free agent Darrington Evans. I think a lot of people were like, including me, does this mean that Ty Johnson might command a little bit more on the open market and they're just trying to cover their bases to bring in a guy that's been in this system, has had some success in the preseason, and then a couple hours later, the Ty Johnson bell rings, and it's a reported 2-year, $5 million contract. And listen, there's a couple of things at play here, Ryan. Ty Johnson coming back, Ray Davis being on the roster, adding Evans, having Gore Jr. on the roster. Like, I'm not sitting here saying that Evans and Gore Jr. are factoring into any of the plans, but knowing the depth of draft at running back, you have to start to wonder, does James Cook moving via trade, is that starting to heat up a little bit for you at all? Is that something that you think we might see happen before the draft? Or where do you land on that? Where do you put the odds or the percentage of confidence ranking of him being on the roster when the Bills kick off training camp?
I still have a high percentage right now in this moment that he's on the roster, 80% maybe, maybe even higher than that at the start of the year. However,
I'm at a solid 40.
Ooh, you're okay. So we are on different ends.
Yes.
I
People want
think
us to disagree more, Ryan. Now
there
we're
it
going to
is.
fight. Put on the gloves.
I think the fact that he went public with the contract demands did leave a bad taste in the mouth of Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott. I know they said otherwise when they met with the media, how much they love him. They hope to be able to keep him long term. He does do a lot for this team, but he's not a 3-down back. He's not a guy that I can justify paying $15 million a year on average. So it's one of those tough decisions, and I get it. You have Ray Davis. You drafted him in the mid rounds last year. You want to get him some more carries. You love what Ty Johnson brought. The draft class has a lot of talent there. I'm not sure you're getting a good enough return, though, for Cook, because if you trade him, you're trading him to a team that's going to have to give him a contract. So what pick you get back, what round you get back, I don't know if it justifies that, because you're going to have to use one of your draft picks then to add another back to that arsenal, into that backfield. Darrington Evans, when that was, announced, they do like him. I mean, he was on the IR for a little while at the start of the year. Then they released him. I think they wanted to keep him around for a little bit in case there were injuries. He had some moments at camp in the preseason. Fans have to remember, too, the Bills have a 90-man roster to fill out initially. So that never hurts to bring a guy in that has some familiarity, that you're getting on that vet minimum, I would assume, type of deal. There's going to be some signings over the next few days, next few months, in fact, where you're like, why are they going after this guy? Well, it has to do with the whole roster that they have to fill out between the draft and free agency. So I don't feel like necessarily these moves mean that Cook is on the move, but he certainly has not done himself any favors this offseason.
No, I'm not saying that the moves necessarily indicate, like, bringing back Ty Johnson and Darrington Evans aren't indicators that James Cook is getting traded. But what I think is starting to probably materialize, or if it hasn't yet, as we get closer to football, it will. James Cook wants a deal, and he wants the deal that he thinks that he's worth getting paid for. I don't think the Bills are going to meet him at that number. And the problem is, I think he'd show up. I think that he'd play. But if you're not going to get to that place and you view him in a certain way, his value is probably never going to be higher than it is right now if you want to get some type of trade compensation. Now, you could sit there and wait, go to the season. Maybe he plays, everything's copacetic. You go into the year and you get to the end of the year, he goes and signs somewhere for a big deal and you get a comp pick back, and that works as well. But I do know, like, if you are working to make another big swing, finding a way to grab more assets in that pursuit is something that, if you're Brandon Beane, you just have to think about. And nobody can answer this question that's not in that building, that knows what the conversations are like between Cook's team, Beane and his team, and where things really stand. I'm not sitting here saying that the Bills are better off without James Cook on their roster, by the way, for 2025. They're not. As a matter of fact, you're gambling a little bit that the person that you draft can fill the role that James Cook has really perfected in this offense, as I'd argue maybe the top weapon in this offense. And in a Super Bowl window, maybe you do take your chances and wait to the other side of the season and then get the comp pick back if he does sign elsewhere, if you don't want to pay that. Or maybe we're all just off the beaten path, and Brandon Beane comes out and does something crazy and gives him 13, 14, $15 million a season, which I don't think anybody really thinks can happen. So there's a lot at play here. And I'm not saying he's going to be traded. I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying my meter has never been lowered to the rate that it is right now on a potential, at least exploring what might be out there and maybe taking conversations on it.
And conversations are fine. Any good GM would take on conversations for pretty much any of your players not named Josh Allen. So that's okay, and that's fine. I would be surprised. I think they're trying to win the Super Bowl in the next year or two. And if you have Cook under contract for this last year of his rookie deal, you want to have him part of it because of how important he's been to this offense, what he can do for this offense. And man, Chris coming in with another big time $20 super chat here. In your opinion, do you think Beane trades up in the draft since we have 10 picks? I think you and I are both on in agreement that we think this is a year that they could trade up in round one to get a Kenneth Grant, to get a premier cornerback maybe that we're not talking about, that they're very high on. Some kind of playmaker at wide receiver. There's a few guys they might really like there that if one were to slip into the early 20s, they could make a move. So yes, I do think that this is a year that they move up in round one. I think that they can move around the board on day two as well with those 2 second-round picks. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I think you get aggressive, and I think there's a couple of names that are really interesting at defensive tackle and then edge rusher as well. Like, I mean, you start thinking, I know this move, and we kind of hit on it already. Bosa is a big time move, but it's not the move or the only move that I think the Bills are going to do at edge rusher after Hoyt to really supercharge this unit. And whether it ends up being defensive tackle or another swing at defensive end, here's another hot take or maybe a little bit of a bold prediction. AJ Epinesa, the Bills can add, I believe it's somewhere around $6 million in cap space. It might be more. I'm going to look it up as we're talking here with a post June 1st cut. If you got Bosa, you got Greg Rousseau, you have Javon Solomon and Epinesa on the roster right now. If you go out and get another big time edge rusher and Hoyt, you go out and get another big time pass rusher in the draft on day one or day two, I think AJ Epinesa all of a sudden becomes expendable in a way. And I'm not saying that they're going to get rid of him. And I know I said bold prediction, but I could see a world where they live in where they want to add a little bit more wiggle room to maybe operate via trade before the season, in season before the deadline. That could be something if they don't see a significant role for Epinesa. You don't want Epinesa falling into, a weird Quentin Jefferson area. Like if you feel like you got 4 guys ahead of him on the depth chart, you move on and you go in a different direction. And that's coming off of a season where I just don't think AJ Epinesa did enough to make himself got to keep him into this season.
Yeah, and that's fair. You know what you're going to get out of Epinesa year in, year out, pretty much a baseline of the sack total. Some weeks he's on, some weeks he looks unbelievable and unstoppable, and he'll go 4 or 5 games where you don't notice him whatsoever. And if you do have enough edge rushers in depth there, because of the post-June 1st cap savings, he is a player to kind of keep in mind there. Absolutely, I am on board with that one with you.
6.2 million. That would be the cap space that they would add with a post-June 1st cut on Epinesa. So, again, he's going to be on the route. They want competition. Even if they do make a big swing, I've seen a couple comments in here about where the Bills getting the salary cap room to make all these moves. You think about 12 million here, 12 million per season for Palmer. It was a 3-year 24 for Hoyt. They obviously bring back Ty Johnson. They've done some work, and going in, they were about minus 4 million, 8 million for Vaughn, about 8 million for Greg Rousseau. So just in those 2 moves alone, you've opened up about 10 million in cap space roughly. And the Josh Allen extension is massive enough. I would imagine that they baked in a huge cap savings on that deal. So they could be working right now with 20 to 30 million. And sometimes you got to remember too, sometimes some of those restructures happen and maybe they're just not reported yet. So a lot of this stuff will kind of come out over the next couple of days.
Yeah, absolutely. You could have a Deion Dawkins restructure or something like that. The Bills obviously had a plan in place with these extensions, with some of the cuts that they've made, and they know exactly what they're operating and working with right now. So as these deals keep coming in, there's no doubt in mind that they feel comfortable with the contracts they're giving out, and the fact that they still have room to add a draft class and some more additional pieces here in that second and third wave of free agency.
I love a good old-fashioned emergency podcast. Free agency officially starts tomorrow. If anything else happens, we will be live right here on the Shout Podcast. Hit that like button, but make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell so every time we go live, you get a notification right sent to your phone. Final thought, Ryan Talbot.
Yeah, final thought. Like you said, stick with us. Anytime there's a major news, major signing, we will be going live. We will have our thoughts and comments on all of the Bills news tomorrow going forward. So stay locked in with us. Consider becoming an insider as well.
All right, sounds good. We'll see you soon. Have a great night, everybody.